with the understanding that, it's costly for the individual, it's costly for the nation. So we certainly learned that. And you've got to understand that literacy by itself is hardly anything. It's the first, the first of many, many steps. But it is an important first step. Without it, it becomes difficult to get the other steps. You need other skills, you need other attitudes, you need other ways of moving ahead, including skills for work, skills for farming, skills for doing things that improve one's life and generate income and so on. So DA has taken the long view and has a systemic view to this. But the tip of the iceberg was Tara Akshar. And it's been phenomenal. I mean, we've been able to bring totally illiterate women, 250,000 of them, 250,000 of them, and we could have done 10 times that if we were better at raising funds, because it does cost money to teach someone, not much less than anywhere else. But by definition, the people who are not literate can't afford to pay. So virtually everything we do in DA is something that is paid for by the client, but this particular product was not. And so we had to raise the money from governments, from foundations, and we did. We raised more than almost $20 million over it, but that's nothing. And with that, we were able to teach, 250,000 women.
Thank you, Dr. Khosla, and full marks to you. And I salute your dedication and commitment for decades of such work. And in the future, I'm sure that we'll go through this. Now, it was said in the Bible that the meek shall inherit the earth. But in real life, non-biblical times, the meek are inheriting the troubles. Yes. When we talk about women, when we talk about the impact of COVID pandemic, women are now facing a new gender gap, and which is the vaccination gender gap and health gender gap. Though globally less women have succumbed to the disease, but they are facing the impact at homes, as we just told you about losing jobs, doing more work, doing work without any remuneration. So that is what is. Among those are the women who are from the minority communities. We have Saida Imam with us, who's a specialist of this. She's worked with the Minority Commission of India, and she's taken up so many similar challenges. Saida ji, I just wanted to thank you once again for joining us, and I want to ask you that, do you think that the impact of the pandemic has been more on women? We just showed some figures, but has it been more on women from minority communities? And what do you think, how they can be targeted to help in these times?
I think
sorry,
still muted.
I think we need to
unmute.
Am I audible? Yep. No, I would like actually to say that although I was with the commission and we were looking after 6 communities, I was patently looking after all of those who needed help. And frankly, you didn't have to differentiate, and I didn't. As it happened, the Buddhists, Christians, and Muslims were the most affected because they were the Dalits who were converted to these 3 religions. So they were actually the most backward, if you like. The Sardar and the Jains and the Parsis and so on were not as limited in all the accesses that other women had. But patently, my work had been to reach out to all those who needed it. So it wasn't really to these communities particularly. And I have gleaned from that a whole lot of things. Actually, lots of bees in my bonnet, as I mentioned to Dr. Khosla, that it seems so essential and perhaps simpler to get to doing. Who people like Dr. Khosla and many others who assist him in the field, in the actual work, could possibly look at and figure out, for instance, I mean, have you noticed that the woman becomes the center of the problem the minute there is any problem of any kind? I mean, COVID happened, right? And there was panic and ignorance and sheer terror that what is this has assailed us. And I think there was pressure put on the government, and the government started the helpline. You would know about that. Within a fortnight, and think 89% or 94%, some crazy figure like that, was not to do with COVID. It was all to do with domestic violence. And the extent to which it was occurring was just not in the least bit less than tragic. And my own feeling is, and I'm sure there's much data to support what I'm saying and elaborate what I'm saying. I'm saying, can we please, for God's sake, there's Geo. There's a manufacturer called Geo, which keeps on doing all kinds of kindnesses in terms of generosities in the world in which they operate. Why can't we have a Geo phone, I don't know, sponsored by do-gooders in the industries or whatever? So this woman now owns a phone. Can a woman, every woman in a lower middle class household, regardless of minority or majority, please, for God's sake, have her own phone? I'll tell you why. Because of COVID, I mean, I'm interested in education, so I'm sort of take interest in a lot of people who are doing very fine work in education. There, the problem is that the telephones in the homes are not available to the girl child. So there are 3 or 4 children at home. They're all studying online. And the boy always gets the phone because, in fact, there's research to show that the parents are now saying that this girl is in any case going to be married, so it's all right if she doesn't attend class. Let this phone be given to the boy. It's with him, and so I'm saying let's make this free phone. It's only available to the girls, and it'll give the mother a lovely place of pride in the household, which she doesn't have at the moment, with her daughters and with her husband, everyone, to say, yes, I'll ration out my phone, you can have my phone for your classes, I will have my phone for my emergencies. My major sort of cry for the phone is also because, do you know that the government has a number of, which I discovered having joined the commission and the various 6 government years that I spent with the government. The government actually does some very, very fine and useful things, very applicable to the very needy. But somehow there's a huge communication gap. They don't, for instance, know that there is a self-defense wing in every in every police station, actually it's meant to be, for women. So there's a wing of women who actually know self-defense tactics completely and totally, making a girl really not, she cannot actually be raped. If the girl goes and gets trained there, she cannot actually be raped. I have, so I'm not, let me finish this maniacal intervention with the time. I've actually used this in Oakland. Let me finish this. In Oakland, there used to be lots of schools, quite a lot of minority schools, where the fathers would remove the girls from school at age 13 or 14 because it was not safe for them to go. They would be, they would be assaulted on the way. Hey, it was all over for them. And I was able in the entire Oakland school region to get them to get trained by the self-defense wing of the police stations in Oakland. And those girls stayed in school. In fact, they would do annual day performances of what they learned and so on. I would, if you would, I think I should shut up now. And
No. We'd like to hear from you, and I'll ask some questions later. And as I said, we are talking to you as someone who's worked very closely with women. And the image which you just drew there is a powerful image. It's about a girl with a phone, because phone and handset has become very important if you want to access financial details. Financial inclusion becomes very important. For education, it becomes very important. For health, I mean, you cannot even enroll yourself for your vaccine if you don't have a phone. And as we have discussed in this series, that only 32% of women in India, beg your pardon, 38% of women in India own their own phones, and most of them could not because of the high charges, and only 18% had heard of internet and used internet. So those are huge challenges ahead of us. And what has also happened during the pandemic, I'm coming to you, Ms. Iyer, what has happened during the pandemic that the corporates, she was talking about giving free phone to all the women, that the corporates have been asked by the government to shift their CSR deployment to the COVID effort, the pandemic effort. So there's a lot of overhang now that all the work the corporates were doing with the society have been diverted to fighting the pandemic. And it's increased our backlogs in that area. That's a very tricky question. And how do you think the corporates you work with, several large companies in India, that how can they now refocus and reinvent themselves, because this is not going to stop. There is no pre-COVID and post-COVID world. There's only one word, which is COVID world. So I'd really like to hear, and everyone would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, basically, I'm saying that there has to be a
Sorry.
conglomeration.
I was asking that. I'll talk to you. Thank you very much. I was asking Rama that question.
Exactly.
Yeah, because corporates. That's why I said that she's one who's been very deftly working with the corporates and their CSR initiatives. Rama.
Thank you, firstly, Pankaj and Development Alternatives for having me here, and also for being so gracious about it. Um, I also want to mention that I've seen the earlier series. I think there's so much of rich content, and I hope you're going to compile it and share it with a larger group. So don't lose it. There's just so much of rich content that you've created in the last series. So it would be lovely to hold on to it. Specifically to your question, and I think that's something we're all grappling with, which is that if we look at women and we're looking at women bringing about systemic change, not only in the homes that they work in and in the community, I think one of the largest challenges that we have is as key stakeholders, whether it's the corporates who are working with the government in addressing the CSR initiatives or even the government itself. I think we have to find ways where we are resilient to any external forces or any sudden external changes like the pandemic, for instance. We do know that more than 60% of the funds which were allotted towards the CSR in the first quarter itself were deployed towards addressing pandemic-related issues, and rightly so also. I think that was the need of the nation. But what it will do is I think it's going to have hugely negative repercussions on a lot of the other initiatives that we're working on. Specifically, if you look at women's literacy, women's employment, just a lot of issues related to women empowerment. I think it's also going to disproportionately affect us. What we don't know is how much and for how long. And I think the jury is still out on that. To address those issues, in fact, some of the things that, I've been sort of looking at and grappling with is, the first thing is I think we need to be internally resilient as companies also. In WPP, for instance, I think the reason we were able to stick to our vision even through the pandemic and work is firstly because we do have CSR representation at the board. And I think it's high time we did that, because CSR in many cases works in a silo. It's not really something which is strategically involved in the organization. So we have board representation. We also have a country head, Srini, and we have a global head also who's hugely committed and invested in it. And I think that protects us from any sort of moving away strategically. And I think that's important in organizations, that you need to have a long-term vision, otherwise change is not going to happen. Which brings me to the second point that, I think also as an industry, we tend to measure ourselves by the input. So if you look at the pandemic, for instance, it's about how many oxygen cylinders have we got, or how many masks do we have. We rarely measure ourselves in terms of the outcome or the actual change that we bring about. This is also something that in your earlier panels, I noticed there was this discussion on what is literacy itself by definition. And I think unless as an industry we move towards addressing larger outcomes and outcome related changes, uh, we don't even have a common definition on what is literacy or what is women's empowerment. I think it just prevents us as an industry to pull together in the same direction, because we're all working on different endpoints and not necessarily an agreed end deliverable. And I think that's critical. Uh, the third thing is, I think we should have the courage to make mistakes. We should really be willing to reinvent. We should be willing to try out new initiatives. Um, I'm quite happy to say that we've made lots of mistakes, and I think we've learned from them. And I do want to talk about a couple of things that we have looked at during the pandemic. Development Alternatives has been one of our critical partners in addressing some of these initiatives. And Saida, to your point on, all women need to have a phone, I think access has been the single biggest challenge. While we wish that all women will have a phone, I think it's, reality takes a little time to sort of convert. So some of the things that we have done in the meanwhile, for instance, is, again, 2% of our audiences also had access to smartphones. What we did is we created email IDs for all the girls. A couple of things they did. It gave a huge sense of identity to the girls. They immediately had their own safe domain. They had their own safe space. We were able to communicate with them one-on-one in a time that was convenient to them. And more importantly, not something their brother, their father, or their father-in-law had access to, or was sort of, looking at the content that was going back and forth. That's helped us really in terms of staying in touch with our girls. The second thing is, a lot of times when we were conducting our programs, the phones were not in the hands of the girls, which again, I think we all know. So we created WhatsApp bots so that the girls could download the content and the educational material and be able to use it in a time that was convenient for them and consume it in bite size in ways that was convenient for them. The other thing, and I'm sticking to digital now because we know that digital equality is the single biggest sort of game changer right now, is just making sure that there are enough trainers and teachers so that the community of learners have enough food for thought. And I think that was the single biggest challenge. We were lucky to be able to take about 75% of our program online. What we did was we did train all our teachers, but I think the larger thing that we're happy with is the women in our community who sort of graduated out of our livelihood centers came back as our digital trainers. And they have now started educating not only the children in the school, but the entire community. And they've become actually our evangelists. And in so many ways, role models for the girls to see women in their community who now come back as their trainers. And lastly, Pankaj, I have to do this, but you did in one of your sessions talk about why can girls not be coders? And I want to push you back on that. So, our girls learn coding, they learn 3D design, they learn robotics, and I'm very happy to report that about 62% of our girls are coders. And in fact, in an inter-school competition, we had one of these girls who was in a 3D program came second, and we're looking at commercializing her product, in fact. But I think, I'm going to end with saying that the big thing that we have learned is that if you're willing to reinvent and sort of put aside what are things which we've learned in the past and best measures, and be willing to keep adapting yourself, then in many ways the pandemic, of course, it's had lots of downsides and challenges, but it's taught us so many things. And we've noticed that the girls and the women who've managed to sort of find moments of success in this situation, it has disproportionately impacted a lot of the softer measures that we track, which is confidence, goal setting, self-esteem. And I really think that when Anjali came up to pick up her certificate, the look in her mother's eyes when she saw her daughter get a certificate for a field which is intrinsically believed as being a male-dominated area, I think those kind of moments, those are the moments that you really look for. Those are the moments of change. And I think that is when perfection has begun. Yeah. And I think it's for people like Anjali and Manisha and so many other girls that I don't want to mention that we're sitting here.
You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct, because the way our society is, the girls, the women, they have to push the boundaries harder and further. And if you just look at the recent match India had, the women's cricket match, just one catch by Miss Deol has caught the imagination of the entire world. That the way she caught that ball was absolutely amazing. But there again, she was pushing boundaries. And creative people, like in your case, WPP, or in the case of my next speaker, Sohini Bhattacharya, Breakthrough, the creative people have to now push the boundaries more and more. So I've seen the earlier breakthrough campaigns, Man Ke Manjeere, that was getting a cultural icon to push those boundaries. Then, Bell Bajao, you did so well in breakthrough, through breakthrough. And do you think that now we have to come up, your community has to come up with new such campaigns which really hit at the equality problem of women, gender gap? We've been talking about literacy, health, financial inclusion, and connectivity, all these things. How are you guys coping up with this, and what are the new things you are thinking and rolling out for people as communicators?
Thank you, Pankaj ji, and thank you, Development Alternatives, for having me as a speaker today. One of the things that I'd love to kind of address is this whole thing that Ashok ji mentioned about instrumentalism. I mean, we do not really want girls and women in our country to reach the full potential because that's going to help with the economy of the country. We want to reach them their full potential because it's their right, right? It's something that they're intrinsically entitled to. And this is where the problem begins, because we do not, really encourage and recognize this entitlement. What happens is that this pervasive gender inequality, which is deep rooted in our ideologies across India and many other countries, of course. Gender bias and discrimination happens to young girls the moment they are born, or whether they are allowed to be born in India. And then it follows through in substantial nutrition, in not being allowed to go to good schools, in being burdened with the unpaid care work. Girls are often take off from schools because they have to, either look after a sibling at home or the housework because both parents are going out to work. And the COVID has, of course, intensified this, but even before that, even before COVID, 1 in 3 women, 33% of women in our country were facing domestic violence. Not just domestic violence, there's sexual harassment out in the roads as well as out in the workplace. So, this whole thing rests on our inability to actually value, respect, and love women and girls for who they are. And so the daily experience of women and girls are harassment, fear, and curbing of freedom. So that's the first thing that I want to kind of put squarely. I loved what Saida ji said. Self-defense is a learned skill, and of course, all girls should do that. But why do we have to learn self-defense? Why can't boys learn, and men and boys learn to restrain themselves? That is $100 million question which very few organizations are really, really addressing now. So given this context, it becomes imperative to engage with the barriers, particularly the violence and the discrimination. And that's faced by women across, in the workplace. And you see that in the number of, women who are dropping off the labor force participation. And violence and safety on the commute to work is definitely a thing that we need to address that. So, normative change to create an environment that discourages violence against women, that declares a workplace as safe, that induces confidence among women living at home and going out to public spaces is something that we have to do that. We do that through an education system. So we have a curriculum called Taroki Toli, which works on teaching young people between the age of 11 and 18 about gender equality, both boys and girls, and all kinds of boys and all kinds of girls. So it teaches them about negotiation skills, teaches them about rights, teaches them to have intergender conversation, because in rural areas, even though they are co-education schools, there's literally a wall between the girls section and the boys section. So it also teaches them intergenerational conversation, because in rural areas, boys and girls do not open up with their parents. There is no conversation about your bodily changes, your menstrual problems, your relationships and other kind of things. These are discouraged. So our gender equality curriculum has now, with the help of the Punjab government, we have now mainstreamed it across 4,500 government schools. And we have really redone the curriculums of English, moral science, and social sciences with a gender lens. And we are going to teach train about 43,000 teachers across the government school system. This is an essential thing that I urge all state governments to look at and take it up. We've seen this happening in Kerala now. We are having talks with the Orissa government to do this. This is something that where we can begin. Because our experience has been that when you talk about gender discrimination and violence and rights with young boys and girls, the thing that happens is a citizenship right. It's not about just gender. Then girls and boys take action for their families, for their communities, for society as a whole. That's my second point. The third thing is that, all of these things about phone and access to phone, we've faced this in trying to reach out to our, 500,000 adolescents that we work with. Why can't the government, through its Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao program, make sure that, like cash transfers, phones are given to young girls? Not just phones, but talk time is given to young girls so that they have the ability to continue their education. They have the ability to be connected to the, outside world. So, if you're just going to make a phone accessible and not give them talk time, or give them talk time but not have a phone accessible, it's not going to really look at the problem. And the second thing is that a phone in a girl's hand is looked as looked down upon. It's not encouraged. Young girls are not encouraged to talk on the phone because, if she's talking on the phone, she must be talking to a man and she might be trying to kind of elope and do other kind of things and bring shame on family. So, as long as the culture is that, as long as the culture is going to actually look down upon that, things are not going to be able to change. So that's the most important part. And third, and the last thing is that, and I'll come to a new campaign called Dakhaldo, which is, how long are we going to be mute spectators of violence at home, in the public spaces, and in workplaces? We would love everybody to be able to stand up and say, no, this is not right. Our campaign calls on every mute spectator to be an active bystander, to come and say, this is not acceptable. We are not going to accept this. So, so that's it. And teaching the community to be responsive to violence is something that would help them overcome their thing about respecting women, valuing girls, loving girls for who they are, and also bring them up as active citizens to make this whole thing about violence.
You're absolutely correct, because we have to fight with basic thing, and that is equality. I mean, looking at women, the other gender, as equals. And when I talk about women's participation in workforce, it's not because I want to improve the economy. I do, which I do. We are like, last year we had a minus 7.5 GDP growth, which this year looks like improving a bit. But it's the opportunity cost. If we don't have the representation of half of the population in our daily workforce, I mean, how can a country progress? I mean, that's the big point, and that will come only through equality. And what you're talking about equality, that will come through the conduct of people who are the policymakers. We look at the last elections, we had only 40.4% representation of women in our parliament, in Lok Sabha. But there are good signs. Even expansion of the cabinet, you can see there are only 11 women among 72 ministers. But that's changing. Last election in West Bengal, TMC decided to field 30% women. Why can't other people do it? And coming to the boardrooms, as Rama was pointing out, I mean, why don't we have representation in company boards of women more and more? There are lots of them. I mean, if you look at the numbers, women in higher studies in India are doing now much better than men, boys, I mean. But they're not still breaking that wall ceiling. We need to, I think, come up with ideas as a socially aware lot to push those boundaries more. Dr. Khosla, I'll come back to you again. Don't you think that this whole conversation we are having, whether it's Saidaji, whether it's Rama, whether it's Sohini, everyone is talking about this whole being connectedness, exchange of knowledge and information. Do you think programs like Tara Akshar can really benefit if you have a very strong component of digital connectivity in it? Because the old world has changed. Now, boots on the ground won't work as much as digital space and connectivity through that. What are your views on that? And can we like reinvent
Yes.
the current programs go and push in that direction?
Unquestionably, Saidi is right, and so is everyone else. That actually goes back to an age when there were no phones. I mean, we've changed. This is a whole millennial change in the last 20 years. And today, it's impossible to conceive of the kinds of issues you were talking about, not just the communications and the learning and the ability to handle public health and disease and food and income. It's one source of identity. It's one source of confidence to be able to deal in a real world. Of course, absolutely right. And, our 56 days is classroom training. And then we discovered after a few years of doing this, that there was a certain amount of recidivism. Over the years, women would forget how to read and write. And in order to bring them back up, we set up a very, very innovative approach, which we call Gyan Chaupali. It's a kind of a reading club, if you like, where they are given time in a supervised sort of place to read magazines and books. And there, it is our ambition, as we get more and more financing for it, to place tablets and internet connections and so on. It's crucial. I mean, without that, you're leaving people behind. But what we have seen is the phenomenal impact that even literacy can have. In the recent UP elections, the number of villages with reserved seats for women was a small amount. Our graduates of the Taraksha program were about 10 times oversubscribed, 10 times as many women applied. And the number who actually got elected was phenomenal. I mean, these women had just made a transition from being totally illiterate to being able to read and write, and probably had a cell phone by now. But they stood for wards and for block development officers and for various and panchayats. And I've got numbers here which are mind-blowing. There were literally a sweep, a flood of Taraksha graduates who became sarpanches and became panchayat leaders. I mean, they were really quite extraordinary. And the feedback I see from that is that you just give a person, it's not just a woman, just give a person a chance to be themselves, and you've got a whole new human being, and they're capable of becoming leaders. The Indian gene pool is not deficient in either entrepreneurship or in leadership. And you just give it a chance, it shows up.
Yes, absolutely. And our young people, they're the ones who are doing it, and they'll be tomorrow's leaders. We've started getting questions now, and I'll just shift.
Yeah, just say something before the question starts.
The question is for you. So the question for you is that, do you think that COVID has deepened, this pandemic duration has deepened the gender gap even more, what you're talking about? And the threat, I mean, all evidence, all the research which has been done goes to show that this has had a spiraling effect.
I would say hugely. I mean, I don't know that actual chapter and verse evidence of the fact, I'm sure exists, but I think it would be very, very safe to assume that the helplessness of the woman is that much greater. And the feeling of frustration all this business of, men should behave differently and so on. For heaven's sake, they are at the moment the most frustrated species. So expecting them to behave differently to what they always done is going to be supremely difficult. I would like to just plant a couple of ideas, particularly for Dr. Khosla, to do with the Tarakshar graduates and for everybody who has anything to do with girls growing up. There is a thing called My Vector. It's a My Vector test, which is a simple, fairly scientific and psychologically, I think, very powerful test, which I've used a couple of agencies in Calcutta to do it. It's called My Vector, where the person is able to discover in a very scientific manner what exactly is the forte, what is the strong point, what is the talent of this creature, of this kid. Should she be a video jockey? Should she be an embroiderer? Should be into artificial intelligence or dancing like Malavika Saruka? Whatever it is, they discover that. My story has been, because I'm in communication all the way through, is that if this girl knows that, no matter how badly she's treated by her in-laws, how she's humiliated by her husband, or how the world treats her like a nobody, she knows. She has a personal knowledge. It's her gold. She knows what she's capable of. And one day she will show it. If she can, she will show it. And in any event, she will not lose herself entirely to the humiliation that's held out to her. And she could actually do very fantastic things. It's really, the spectrum is entirely open to us. But do put every girl you know through that test. It doesn't cost very much money. They're wonderful people. They're wonderful young couple of men who run this agency. There are many, many available. And I think it is a kind of gift you're giving. It's better than a dowry to that girl. She knows.
It's terrific.
मैं जो अचार बनाऊंगी कोई नहीं बना सकता है. मैं जो राग गाऊंगी वो कोई नहीं गा सकता है.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, you are giving her psychologically what she needs to face the world, which is not going to be nice, right? And I'll also ask you to contact people in government, because government does all sorts of things which the beneficiaries don't actually know. There's a thing called Mahila Samakhya, who, when I was very excited, Dr. Khosla, about Tarakshar and education and skilling of the girls, they said, look, hang on. You are organizing for the girls to get more exploited than they already are. You are qualifying them, you're giving them talents, you're honing their talents, their money. They kept on giving me examples of how the money that the girl earns is taken away from her. It's not hers to keep. So they had a thing called Mahila Samakhya program, which is really about the girl developing confidence in herself. Because actually talent and excellence, unfortunately, in the Indian girl does not give her confidence. She still thinks she's hiding in the room until she's called to say, Aake gana suna do. Yeah, jo bhi karna hai.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that she ain't confident. And this Mahila Samakhya is, they've done various things, created sangatans and so on, given them a bit of legal training. I'm saying that if you do that, then they can stand up and say, my education is my dowry. They can also stand up and say, I would like you gentlemen and you ladies to figure out what legal resort one can have to actually say that the dowry, which willy-nilly this girl will be given. I'm sorry, I'm jumping subjects, but willy-nilly the girl will be given a dowry. Can it not be hers?
Yes, absolutely.
Entirely in her custody.
You are absolutely so correct that
they have no access to her bank account. They have no access to her safe deposit vault with her gold jewelry. Dowry is hers. It's her generosity to part with them, from her to
financial stability, which actually all confidence comes from financial stability and financial security. And we've discussed that at length when we talked about financial inclusion and how women are falling out of on that map. In India, only 13% women own farmland. Now you can imagine that almost 60% of India is dependent on farm income or in the rural areas. And only 13% own that. And if we can come up culturally, socially, and push the government to have some sort of legislation where the farmland can be in the name of women, girls, and all this dowry, all these problems will be solved by itself. So that's it. And resilience also, that's a big problem. Another question is for you, Rama. Have you worked on making communities more resilient, and has that turned them more empowering towards women? What has been your experience?
So, so to answer your question, I mean, the way we work is we work through schools, and through schools we work through into the communities. So the way we've looked at communities being resilient is by creating evangelists among our girls, who are the change makers who bring about the change in the community. So we don't directly work with community; we work in community through the schools that we work with.
Yeah, okay. Next question goes to Sohini. Have you seen instances where women have raised their voice against the sexual harassment or violence uh, through digital means?
Yes, there are many instances where women have, and one of the my points to Rama was that while we really appreciate more and more women getting onto the net and getting onto the digital space, we really have to think about digital safety for women, because just like women are not safe in the streets or at their home, they're also not safe on the digital. And because digital gives you a lot of anonymity, there is more concerted attacks on women. There are many organizations in India who are working on digital safety, and we have we and there are means to actually women can learn how to keep themselves safe on digital. There are many trainings on that, but also again the culture needs to be changed there. Just like we tell women do not go out at night because it's unsafe for you, we say do not go to the internet because it's unsafe for you. Why do we have to do this? This is 2021. This is a new century altogether, and women do not have to be afraid to go anywhere.
We have to move forward. We have to move forward with new ideas. Okay, so
I actually just want to react to that. I totally agree with you, Shoini. I think there are two ways to look at it. One is to say don't go to the internet because it's unsafe. I think where we come from is saying that it is inevitable. So how
Yeah.
can we manage the situation so that it's safe and so that they feel comfortable navigating the net in a manner that is safe as well as beneficial to them? So yes, the first part of our training is digital safety and digital cybersecurity and digital citizenship, and it's critical. In fact, the girls now are teaching their families on cybersecurity.
Yeah,
and
and I think the technological companies have a responsibility on this as well. What are the Googles and the Facebooks and the Twitters and the things of the world are doing? They take down any comment that you make as, as something which is not permitted. But, you can share nude pictures, you can share, explosive comments, and you can share, whatever you want to say against the women, and those are never taken down. They have a responsibility to do this.
yeah, and unfortunately, in India, at least, most of the big tech platforms have women representing them in India, and that's one contradiction I could never think of. Next question is also, we are just turning into the whole digital thing, and the minute you start talking about digital connectivity and technology, I mean, there are a lot of questions, thousands of questions which come in. Uh, and it's very good for me that two participants talk to each other because it reduces my work. But we have to go forward on our livelihood and empowerment theme. And one of the thing I'd like to know from all of you one by one is uh, how to basically create new paradigms, new programming, new platforms on this theme, where now we have two, three things which are very clear. That we need connectivity, we need health security, and health security I mean pandemic, post pandemic, but well, health security. We need participation, a lot of participation by women in different kind of things. And everyone keeps, we get stuck at this problem that we have to change our attitude. We've been talking about changing our attitude from millennia now. How do we change this attitude? How can all this work done by the corporates as CSR, by NGOs, Club of Rome, Dr. Khosla, and by Breakthrough, all this, how this can be now pushed together in one direction, and that is that how to get more and more women participating in our daily affairs. Dr. Khosla, I'll begin with you.
Well, look, attitudinal change and behavioral change doesn't happen on its own. No matter how much you proselytize, how much you use the power of the pulpit, whatever. They happen with, in my opinion, just two or three things. One is charisma. Charisma like the Lord Buddha or Jesus Christ or Muhammad or Mahatma Gandhi. These are people, St. Francis of Assisi. These are people who are able to somehow reach on a very large scale through some kind of human resonance, the ability to change mindsets. But they come only once every 1,000 years or so. So, you can't wait for the next one in order to change the attitudes of people. The second is crisis. And the third is collapse of societies, of the economy, etc. Now, we happen to have been just in the last 15 months given a chance because we've just gone into something which is kind of a mixture between crisis and collapse. And we've got to use it. We've got to use it to our advantage. And I think to some extent, the thoughtful people, the people who think about these things, because a large part of society is still talking about going back to the pre-COVID normal. I mean, if they're going to go back to that, we've really had it. It's not just the women who will have had it, nature will have had it, people will have had it, the whole system will have broken down, species will have gone extinct, the climate will have changed, and we'll be all at square zero. So obviously, we have a chance right now for thoughtful people, the kind of people who are on the screen right now and listening in, to go out there and say, we're not going to go back to the world before COVID. And to that extent, I think we need to rise up the youth, the young people, whose world it is that they need to worry about. And I think there's a chance that we can do that using COVID as one of the reasons why we've learned a lesson, I hope. And that lesson really is, in my 3 words, expect the unexpected. Design a world in which you have a resilience, you have a future where everyone benefits and very few people have to lose because of that.
Yep, absolutely. Expect the unexpected. And I got a question now from Ajita. What are some concrete steps that organizations can take to overcome the socio-cultural barriers and ensure that all girls and women have equal access to technology? This is, Rama, this goes your way.
Yeah. So I think, so again, I think the jury's out. I think we're all testing, we're all figuring out. I don't think we have an answer or a sort of a magic wand where I can just tell you these are the 3 things you do and it's going to work. But intuitively, I think one of the biggest barriers is access. So, I know Saida's talked to it. I know Shoini's talked to it. But we have to find ways to give access to the girls. I think that's the single biggest challenge that we find. The second thing is there seems to be a bit of fear of the digital space. Maybe it's something which is deep rooted because it's seen as something which is negative, which might change the basic moral ethos of girls and of women. So to that extent, it's not something which is really it's not something which is encouraged. If a girl is seen on the phone for a long period of time, it's invariably seen as something which is counterproductive. It can't possibly be positive, right? So you always say, get off the phone, get off your digital device. So I think one is breaking those barriers in terms of access, making it easier for her. And the third thing is legitimizing it, because it is seen as, and this is something that Shoini also talked to, it is seen as taboo. It is seen as something which a lot of the so-called forward girls, are using the phone because they're invariably using it for socializing or for doing things which are inappropriate. So legitimizing it to a certain extent also. I also think that cybersecurity, which we talked about, is something which needs to be a part of, in fact, we've always sort of talked about this, saying that the minute you give a phone to somebody, should there be a module on cybersecurity, which is part of it, which just goes into, how do you use the phone and safe methods of using the phone. So to my mind, it would be those sort of 4 issues that I would start with.
Yes, absolutely. And when we talk about cybersecurity, we forget that the only country which has dealt with the cybersecurity and fake news problem is Finland, because they teach fake news in schools. Yes, and that's the only way you teach people and you make a whole generation aware of this. And this whole problem of fake news and misinformation and disinformation online, I mean, it just goes away because the citizens are more aware. And that's another thing about education. And that should also be about education of women, as we are talking about. Saidaji, as a rounding off this part of the webinar, how do you think this whole COVID thing is going to affect women in a long run?
Uh, there is no question about it that they'll have to cope with more, and they're used to doing it. And somehow I feel that the spirit can be lost. I mean, the important thing for her to, despite everything, but I don't think we've already talked about several things that should be done in order for her life to be a lot better. And empowering her, giving her a phone she can call her own, giving her self-defense we're giving her education, giving her vector, what she can further in her life. But in all of this, and I don't know about women, I would say this across the board for all of us, is that, the ability to say, what can I do about it? What did I do wrong and what can I do about it? Rather than something terrible has happened, somebody has been offered to me, I am the victim. I think we have to get everybody out of the system of saying, somebody else did wrong and I have to suffer. No, if something is wrong, maybe you did something wrong, or maybe you can do something to make it better. Somehow a I would like to get every woman to feel that, look how empowered I am, because I seem to be the center of dealing with every misery. How can I cope? What can I do? Rather than become the submitting victim. And I think, I'll give you a story. When we were growing up, and I was very spoiled kid actually, my parents, if you ever took a problem to them, said, what did you do wrong? You're coming with complaining about someone else. What did you do wrong? What did you do wrong? And so let's think about that. Now, they don't actually love me. I discovered that in my corporation, which I joined actually, Dave Walker Thompson, which had this lovely policy of first-person intolerance.
So
First-person intolerance, I think, is an important thing for all of us to remember. First, ask, what did I do? Because blaming the other and making things infinitely worse is, I have to be stronger no matter how rotten my partner is or rotten the world. Which is why I talk about my vector, which is why I talk about the fact of I'm the one who can make a difference. And if you were to take that attitude, if the woman was to take that attitude, the surrounding world will be more cooperative. The surrounding world, because they're not being blamed, are going to be more cooperative with her. So when you start getting blamed, that the person refuses to help.
If we have to come out of this, what you said was being stronger. And I see it as on a larger canvas, that if we have to come out stronger from this pandemic, we have to understand things. We have to understand new things, that now with livelihood, financial stability, more participation in society, we have to, as a nation, as a community, as a country, we have to take this in our stride that taking women along, hearing them more, listening to them is going to make us stronger. Because from this pandemic, we can't come out. I mean, all the repository of wisdom doesn't stay at number one, at the people who are at the policy level, and number two, the men they think that they monopolize that policy making, it will not work. Because we are in a new era. We are in a new world. This planet has never faced something we've just faced in the last 15 months. And to come out of this, we have to think of new things. And one of those new things could be equality for women. And that will make us more stronger. They'll make us stronger and more resilient to deal with anything in the future. I really thank you, all the participants, Dr. Khosla, Saida ji, Sohini, Rama, for your participation in this. And I hope that this dialogue continues, and we'll try to make it more permanent. And if you want to join in this, all the numbers are there on your screen. You can join in with Taraksha's this effort as a volunteer, as a supporter, as a contributor, as a donator. And thank you for watching this. And thanks for now. Goodbye. Namaskar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Pankaj.
Thank you, everyone.